Hey guys, I'm just putting the final touches on this Predicta Holiday chassis, and I'm hoping I can call it done finally. So, you may recall that the original caps, electrolytic caps, were gone in this set, and there were some hacked-in replacements that didn't fit right. So I had initially scattered 4 electrolytics around the chassis, but I wasn't really happy with that, especially the main filter ones, which I had tacked in on top of the chassis. They just weren't mounted that safely, I didn't feel. So I remember that I got a kind donation not too long ago of a big box of new old stock electrolytics. Well, I dug through them and found one that was exactly the right size with 4 lugs on it. Now, it wasn't the right capacitance, and even if it had been, these are pretty old, so I didn't feel comfortable using it in the set, but it was great for restuffing. So I cut it open, mounted 4 new caps, wrapped it tightly with some aluminum duct tape so it's not going anywhere, and then was able to use the original clamp because now this is the right size. And then I removed the temporary caps I had tacked in and routed the wires the way they were originally. Alright, so that takes care of that. Something else I want to do is the original 3-section ceramic filament dropper was a mess, so I replaced that with 3 discrete resistors, which is fine, but I use the exact values as the original. However, the line voltages are typically a little bit higher. This was designed for 117. The standard in the US now is 120, and in many areas it's a little bit higher than that. So what I want to do is bump up this resistance a little bit. I checked the current draw with just the tubes in place, and I took the fusible resistor out, so it was just filament draw. A little bit over 0.6 amps with about 123 volts. So I want to drop that down. So I'm going to pop out this 8 ohm guy and stick in, well, I'll try the 18 first and see how that goes. So that will have 12.5, 18, and another 18. So in other words, I'm going to add 10 ohms to this. The other one I got handy is I have another 12.5 I could throw in there. Now back to the top side. Here's another bit of ugliness I didn't like, is the original dual germanium rectifier for the voltage doubler was bad, and I just tacked in some 1N4007 diodes. They were just kind of floating in space up here, and I had a big filter cap over here. That's not so safe, so I took all that out. And I was going to mount a terminal strip in here for the new parts, but then I examined this more closely and realized I can reuse it. So that little lump there and the one over there are the original rectifiers. I snipped out the other lead, so now I have 3 terminals I can reuse. I'm going to clean off the remains of the wires there. That bit at the bottom, this part, this is an insulator. So these are copper fins used for heat dissipation. These original diodes, I guess, weren't as efficient as modern ones, which really do not get warm at all. So I think that's why they had these are actually copper heatsink fins here. So I don't really need those, but they make handy tie points. So the center one goes to ground, and the other sides go to either diode. That is the thing inside the dashed lines you see here. So I'll clean off the lugs, mount my 2 replacement diodes up there, remount this down, and run the wires back they were originally, and I think that will be it. Then recall, this is just a chassis that was sent to me for restoration, but my cabinet is pretty much restored, and I've reinstalled the CRT on top of it. So I'm going to slide this chassis into my cabinet to give one final power up before I ship it out. I ended up going with 18 ohms, so in other words I added about 10 ohms to the filament string. And here is the rebuilt voltage doubler rectifier assembly. So yeah, just 2 little dinky diodes, that's all it takes. And that leaves one more thing that I want to deal with, which is fine-tuning. I've noticed there's a lot of slack in the knob Well, I compared this to another set that doesn't have any slack, and it turns out that the culprit is this metal assembly that locks into this plastic that goes in, that's part of this disc. So this was what forms the variable capacitors, this plastic disc here with a diameter that increases. So this forms one side of the capacitor and the body is the other half. So in other words, it's varying the dielectric between the two capacitor plates. Well, from years of people rotating the metal, it's been biting into the plastic and wearing it away. So I'm going to clean out the goo in there and try putting a little glob of epoxy. Let's see if that will take care of the problem. Yeah, I think that's going to work out just fine. So I sprayed this area with some electrical parts degreaser and then some contact cleaner, and then used a needle file to rough up the plastic surface to give the epoxy something to grip. Slobbered some on there, and yeah, no slop at all. Alright, so let's see. Oh, one other thing I did is, earlier I'd been using this extended fusible resistor, pulling with shorter leads on there. One thing you really want to avoid is any chance of this hitting this, especially if the coating is flaking off, because this is ground and that is on one side of the AC line, so that would be very bad. Alright, let's see, so I'm going to remount the dial light, like so, and reinstall the horizontal output tube, and then comes the fun part. The fun part being trying to install it back in the cabinet. Had enough fun reinstalling the head, the CRT head, and threading the cables through. I ended up just taking a little length of telephone wire and wrapping it around these wires so I could get it through that hole while carefully lowering the CRT onto the base. I also put some lithium grease in there before I did so it rotates nice and smoothly. So the deal is, you need to connect this stuff up to the chassis while you're sliding it in. These two aren't so bad. These plug into some sockets on the chassis. Speaker plugs into two lugs along the side of the chassis. There are some really good detailed instructions in the service info about how to dress the leads. You shouldn't just plug these into the chassis and then slide it in and have these wires hung up like this. They have directions on how you should do them, like I believe the speaker cable is supposed to go through this. There originally was a loop up here on mine, but it broke off, and I believe you are supposed to hook these up. That's probably why this tape is here, like so. The idea is you want to keep these away from certain areas in the chassis so they don't pick up noise. Also, I believe there are specific instructions for this, which is the video lead. You especially don't want noise to get on this. That's why it's on its own separate wire, and that plugs in one of the stakes on the main circuit board somewhere about here. So that leaves one, and that's the trickiest one, which is this. This is the high voltage lead. This needs to go through a hole in the high voltage cage and then down vertically into a little hole near the base of the high voltage rectifier tube, which you cannot do if the high voltage rectifier tube was installed. It's got to have the tube out, somehow get the chassis positioned so you got enough slack you can get this through the hole, down in that, and then pop in the high voltage rectifier tube, put on the anode cap, and slide this in while not damaging or messing anything up. So I think I better put this down on the floor because I can't have the chassis kind of hanging here in midair. I gotta have it supported, so I'll put this down on the floor so I can have the chassis hanging half out and put something under it to cushion it, support it. Oh, funny thing about this cabinet, well, they say timing is everything. So I spent all this time touching it up and putting new veneer on here and getting it looking fairly respectable. Well, What do you suppose is on eBay right now? It is a blonde Holiday cabinet. Just the cabinet. No chassis, no antenna, no CRT, no knobs. Just the cabinet. For, I think a buy it now is $70, or I could do an opening bid of $50 or thereabouts. If I hadn't restored this yet, I would do it in a heartbeat. The blondes are rarer, and it looks like it just needs just a very minor amount of touch-up. But, like I said, timing's everything. I just put all the effort into this, so I'm going to stick with it. But boy, it's tempting just to have the option, if I wanted to, of swapping this out and have both either a blonde or mahogany. Luckily, there was some room in front of the cabinet, so I was able to move the whole set closer to the wall, which left just enough room that I could hang the chassis partially out of the cabinet. So, let's start hooking stuff up. First off, here's the video lead. That goes to this stake here, the one that has nothing else going to it. Two plugs are pretty straightforward. The big one plugs in here. Smaller one plugs in here. I'm not worried about dressing these leads, as I mentioned, because I'm just going to be taking this right back out of the cabinet after I let it run for a few hours to make sure there aren't any problems. In other words, do a burn-in test, I guess they call it. Two speaker wires connect to these two sticks. They're the ones that have a couple wires coming down here. These are going straight to the audio output transformer, which leaves the high voltage cable, this guy. So, here's the hole that goes through inside the high voltage cage. And it needs to do a right angle turn and go down into that hole down there. Now, maybe with some needle nose pliers I could do this with the tube installed. I'll give that a shot. The reason I don't like taking this tube in and out is every time you do, you risk damaging this lead, maybe even breaking it off from the flyback. This is going to the high voltage secondary, which is like a million turns of really fine wire. However, if you ever do find one that's damaged, with this lead broken off, all is not lost. This wire is not going straight into that high voltage winding. There's kind of a layer of insulation wrapped around the outside, and like a little piece of board material like this, and like an anchor point. So the fine wire attaches to that point, and this wire comes in and solders onto it. So if this breaks off, you just carefully chip away at that coating to get to that lug, and then you can reattach the wire, hopefully. Replacements for these are not easy to come by. Alright, if I can get that attached, slide this in further, hook up the speaker, and then that just leaves the antenna, which I'm not going to bother hooking up for now. But if I wanted to, these two wires go through these, or through here, I believe, and then hook onto these solder lugs. But I'll just be using this balun and hooking up a strong source, like from a converter box. Well, I ended up having to take the tube out after all. Just couldn't get it in. Get that in the way. So just put that back down in there. Carefully move this over. And that's that. I'll put the cover back on. So then I went to hook up the speakers, and well, connect one of them, no problem. Or maybe not. These don't want to go in. And I can see one of them. It looks like there's a broken off piece of wire jammed in there. Unless maybe when you slide these down, is it supposed to just go on one side of the insulation? That doesn't seem right. that? Nah, it's got to go down the center. But, boy, so close to being done. Thwarted by stupid speaker connector. Well, I don't know if that's the way they originally were intended to work or not, but I ended up just shoving these down so that the stake is going between the plastic and the bit of metal where the wire is going down into. I mean, there's just no way that this large a stake is going to go up in there any other way. So, alright, well, that should do the trick. So now I'll slide this back in. And, well, I'll put the cover back on and slide it back in. Put 2 screws down here. And see if this thing actually works. And here it finally is installed. There's just 2 screws to hold it in where the red arrows point. The front of it is held in by a couple pins. There are a couple rails here and here. The chassis kind of slides down and there's a pin on either side at the end of those rails that kind of lock in on the front to keep that from moving around. And I do have the back for this. Original back in decent condition. Go on something like that. However, original cord's not in the greatest shape. It's missing a plug on the end, so I am not going to be using this. I'll just leave this off for now and use a cheater cord. Eventually, I will endeavor to replace this with something. I was going to say that I could maybe just splice on a new plug, but then I noticed that this a little bit frayed there, so yeah, this whole thing's going to have to go. What you can do though is carefully cut this away and leave those brass rivets in place, and look and search hard and far and wide, and maybe you can find a cheater cord with the same type of non-polarized configuration with the ears, and then you heat it up and you can mush it down over the original rivets, and then the vinyl will harden and it'll work just like the original did. They are not easy to come by though. Occasionally they pop up on eBay, and you know, just keep a search going, keep an eye out. Typically they go for around 15 to 20 bucks a pop. They just don't make them anymore. They haven't made them in a while, and they are not so easy to find. Okay, it is all hooked up. So, what do you suppose the chances are that I did not make a single mistake when putting it back together? Well, let's find out. Okay, turned on. That's a good sign. I can see tubes all lighting up. Got some sound. Got a rolling picture. Got a lock. All right. Just in the fine tuning. Definitely better right about there. Alright, cool.
Something to better someone. To better you.
Here it is with the overhead lights turned off, so you can see a little bit better. Now, I know the picture isn't centered right. The bottom's cropped a bit and so is the left edge a little bit, but keep in mind this is not the CRT that's going with this chassis in the end, so I'm not going to mess with all those fine adjustments, which are all located in the back of the CRT, until I put my chassis in this cabinet. Because those adjustments have nothing to do with the chassis. They have to do with centering magnets on the neck of the CRT. Also, the yoke is crooked. It's tilted a bit this way.
It even reduces glare from oncoming headlights at night. Get the EasyView XT glare blockers for just $10. Order right now.
One thing I'm happy with is there's not a really loud buzzing when you see these commercials and the harsh text gets on there. These have a specific buzz control on the chassis, which seems to do a really good job of eliminating that. Also, a little bit of tweaking of the fine-tuning helps. And keeping the contrast turned down. Oh no, even with the contrast maxed, it's not too bad. However, I think if I go to the back of the set and flip the local distance to distance, it's getting a little too harsh now with the gain. Still no buzzing though, but clearly the picture's getting all messed up and distorted. It's overdriving the video amp.
With Uber's high-speed internet, you'll get the speed you need at a price you'll love.
Right about like that. Looks pretty good.
High-speed internet with a Wi-Fi gateway to connect all your Wi-Fi devices and save on your mobile data.
So that's going to be it for restoring this Predicta Holiday chassis. Assuming nothing goes wrong, I'm going to leave this run off and on for on and off for the next couple days and see if any problems develop. If not, it's going to get shipped out. So I hope you enjoyed this restoration series on a Predicta Holiday chassis. And as soon as this chassis goes out of this cabinet, I'm going to finish off my chassis and put it into this cabinet. Oops, a little bit of a problem there. It happened once before too. It's the connector, I believe, between the CRT and the chassis. So I rotated the CRT a bit. Yeah, there it goes again. Well, I've taken the chassis out 3 times now and wiggled the cables, and each time I put it back together it works for a little while, and then the same problem, the horizontal collapse, and I lose raster. And I put it back together and the raster comes back up. So I'm thinking either it's a heat issue or some really flaky connectors. Because when I had this on the workbench, I let it run for quite a while and I never had any problems.
I did get an A in hockey, Mr. Peabody.
That's a cookie, and step inside. With that, join me. Plus,
And there it goes again. I'm sure you heard that hum. So, I guess this won't be the final installment on this set. Oh, the joys of owning a Predicta TV. Alright, so, well, that's going to be it for now because I'm getting tired and I don't want to make any silly mistakes. So, well, I thought this would be the final installment, but I guess not. And next one will be some troubleshooting. One last thing, the set's been off for a while now, so let's see if it really is a heat issue or something else. No raster. Huh. That's weird. So I really think it is a bad connection. But why that bad connection would get fixed each time I pull the chassis out and put it back in and then quickly fail again, it just seems crazy. And I've tried rotating this and give it another shot and see if it helps any. Like, I know materials expand when they get warm, but you'd think when it get cool and contracts it would reestablish contact. But no, I mean, it seems like nothing I can do can make the picture come back except to pull the chassis out, wiggle a couple things, and then slide it back in. And then it fails again after a short while. Weird.